I rise to give my wholehearted support to this measure, which I consider to be of immense importance and a landmark in the history of industrialization in the country. This bill aims at setting up a permanent machinery for according protection to those industries of our country which stand in need of it. This country, which is so very rich in all its resources, was at one time of its history at the pinnacle of glory, not in the production of raw materials, but in the manufacture of finished goods. But the continuous foreign rule for centuries ruined all its industries, with the result that the country has been brought down from that height of industrial glory. For centuries, our production, though it was more or less of the cottage industry type, commanded markets throughout the world. We know what steps were taken by our foreign rurals to discourage our home industries and to raise the protective tariff walls in their own country to make it industrially sound. We know how our weavers were tyrannized. It is a matter of history and needs no repetition here. Therefore, this country, which has been under the heel of the foreigners for centuries, has now to begin its life afresh and to rejuvenate and renovate its ruined industries. I therefore regard this measure, which is the first constructive attempt on the part of the government to bring industry on a sound footing, as a great landmark in the history of industrialization. For years, this country and the government, which was at the helm of its affairs, believed in unrestricted foreign trade. It was only during World War I that the then government thought for the first time that some steps must be taken in this country towards industrialization. An industrial commission was appointed in 1916. It apparently had nothing to do with the tariff policy, but for the first time it concentrated attention on the sphere and domain of the development of industries in the country. Times were changing. There was a feeling of political consciousness amongst the masses. With the August Declaration of 1917, there was a cry for the grant of fiscal autonomy, and for the first time, we saw fiscal autonomy in the convention. In 1923, the first fiscal commission was appointed, and subsequently, the government appointed ad hoc tariff boards. We must keep in mind that it was still the foreign government that was at the helm of affairs, and the terms of reference of these ad hoc tariff boards were very limited in their character. For example, before any industry could be considered to be entitled for the grant of protection, it was essential that there should be abundant natural resources for that industry available in the country itself. There should be a local market for its produce. There should be real potentialities for its development and its development at a rapid pace. Even then, the protection was afforded only for limited periods, and that too only in cases where a certain industry could stand foreign competition. These were the limitations, but even in this limited sphere, we have several illustrations which show that the government of that day never accepted the recommendations of these tariff boards when they clashed with the interests of foreign capitalists, particularly British capitalists in this country. In 1928, the government refused to grant any protection to the locomotive manufacturing industry on the lame excuse that there was no market for it in India. We know how crores and crores of rupees had to be spent for buying locomotives outside the country, and even today we are importing these locomotives from abroad. Thus, we see that then these tariff boards were appointed for the first time. They functioned in a very halting and indecisive manner, and they were intended only for the protection of the interests of foreign capitalists and not for the development of indigenous industries. Then came the war. From 1939 up to 1945, the policy of the government was to maintain the protection already afforded by giving fresh lease of life to the Protective Duties Acts. It was in November 1945 that the then government appointed an interim tariff board which, with extended life, is still working and which tariff board is sought to be replaced by the Tariff Commission envisaged in this piece of legislation. This bill incorporates very important provisions which fall into three categories. Firstly, Chapter 2 deals with the establishment of the Commission, its personnel and constitution, the qualifications of the members and the chairman, and also the terms of office and tenure of service of the members and the chairman. The second part, which is the very soul of this legislation, deals with the functions and duties of the Commission which are incorporated in Clause 11 of the bill. The third part of the bill is of a routine character. Mr. Deputy Chairman, sir, the House is just now considering the situation arising out of the closure of the Banaras Hindu University. It has been suggested that this closure was the result of a certain atmosphere prevailing in the student community, not only in the Banaras Hindu University but in the universities all over the country. This raises, sir, a very big issue, the issue of discipline among students. The question naturally arises as to who is responsible for this discipline going down. Sir, I would resist the temptation in this debate of going into the various factors that are responsible for discipline among the students going down if it has gone down to the extent which has been stated by the previous speaker. At any rate, sir, I am not prepared to believe that it is only some mysterious influences that are suddenly operating in our student community and the so-called political agitators are the only culprits in this matter. If we go on harping on these influences, we will not be in a position to analyze the situation exactly, and we will not be in a position to go to the very root of the matter which vitiates and certainly does vitiate the situation in our universities. But as I said, we are considering today a situation that has arisen as a result of the closure of the Banaras Hindu University, and unless it is made out that the situation in the university is worse than the situation in other universities as far as students indiscipline is concerned, this particular factor cannot unnecessarily be harped on. There may be deterioration in the student discipline, but that is an all India phenomenon. Fortunately for this country, we don't find all universities being closed down in this way. It is only the Banaras Hindu University which was forced to close down. Secondly, it has been argued that a university is a peculiar place, is a place where students and professors meet together in a peculiar atmosphere which might be described as a sacred atmosphere, and to that extent the outside world need not take any interest in it, that a university should be allowed to manage its own affairs. This House would be very pleased if that was the situation in the Banaras Hindu University and the public was not called upon to take interest in its affairs. It has been said that after our chairman Dr. Radhakrishnan left the Banaras Hindu University, the situation began to deteriorate over there, and that all these incidents are the culmination of the various developments that were taking place there. May I respectfully submit that even after Dr. Radhakrishnan left the Banaras Hindu University, there were vice chancellors who could manage that university quite well and could enforce discipline among the students in spite of the fact that certain situations and conditions and forces might be working in that university which might be taxing the ingenuity of the vice chancellors. Therefore, we have to take into consideration what exactly happened in this period when the situation went out of hand. How is it that the situation was created in the Banaras Hindu University whereby the closure was forced upon? And that does bring us to the question of the Vice Chancellor of the Banaras Hindu University. I realized that the government or the university, or for that matter, any self-respecting person or institution, should not bow down to any fiscal force, should not bow down to any compulsion that might not have any reason behind it. Any irrational force, any irrational threat, any irrational situation which might force an individual or an institution to bow its head against its own wishes and better judgment is certainly a situation which no self respecting person or institution can accept. At the same time, it is necessary that we have to go into this question when we find that in the Banaras Hindu University a situation arose which, for a considerable time, made it very difficult for the university to continue its normal course and its normal working, and it is here that we have to find out if we cannot improve that situation, not because we have to bow down to threat, but because of the situation which has arisen, because of the passions which are roused, because of a particular atmosphere which is now existing in the Banaras Hindu University today. I have no knowledge of the present Vice Chancellor of the Banaras Hindu University excepting what I read in the newspapers, and I know that it is not a very safe guide to judge as to whether a particular individual is a fit individual to carry out the responsibilities which he has undertaken or not. But I know this much, that after he has become the Vice Chancellor of the university, perhaps because of no fault of his own but because of the developments that have taken place, it has become difficult to carry on the normal routine.